Hey gamers, Maniac here with GameAccess.net doing a very requested podcast for you guys. I know this one's been a long time coming, but we're going to be doing it today. This is the Pokemon franchise podcast. I know I was asked to do this podcast for quite a while, and I told you guys, if it's a standing order, you guys are welcome to pick future podcast topics in my comment section. And I do read those comments. So I like to keep them all, I like to, because I know you guys are my watchers. You're my readers, you're my watchers. And because of that, I want to basically keep you guys around. I want to keep you guys happy. But in some cases, particularly with this one, I didn't feel comfortable doing the podcast until I was able to actually play through the Pokemon games. And there are a lot of them. I mean, the franchise has been around for 20 years. They're celebrating their 20th anniversary this year. In fact, we're going to be talking about that later. And just easily as of 4 years ago, I hadn't played through a single Pokemon game. This has been a long time coming. Now, the reasons why I haven't been able to play through the Pokemon games are varied, and I'm going to go into some of them in just a few minutes. Most of the time it has to do with the fact I either didn't have the hardware to play the Pokemon games, or I didn't have the software to play the Pokemon games, likely because of cost. The games get out of print and they get outmoded, and that kind of thing happens, and then it becomes expensive to obtain them, or prohibitive to obtain them because they're out of print, not available. And then, which is something else I'll get into, sometimes you get a brand new copy and you just don't want to open it because the collector's value and stuff like that. But we're going to talk about that one later on too. So let me give myself a little bit of background. I mean, I was not an original Pokemon fanatic, but I was around, and I do fondly remember the beginnings of Pokemon fever once it started to sweep the United States in the late 90s, early 2000s. I was there for that. I unfortunately didn't have much of a chance to participate in it, but for the stuff that I did, I'm going to be talking about. And obviously, Pokemon has seen an enormous resurgence, and the likes of which I haven't seen before, probably within the past, easily since 2012. I mean, since 2012, there's been a huge resurgence in Pokemon, which culminated or really started kicking off when 2013 happened and Generation 6 came out. But we're going to get into that in just a bit. I'm getting a bit ahead of myself, but I want you guys to be aware of what I'll be talking about before we get started. I don't know how long this Pokemon podcast is going to go. These are unscripted podcasts, and I have nobody here with me to talk me through it. But I have a lot of memories about Pokemon that I want to share with you guys, a lot of behind-the-scenes information that I'd like to share. And I think now is the time to get started. Now, a lot of people online have already done histories of Pokemon videos, and I really don't want to tread upon their toes. And so I'm going to kind of try to make the background of the Pokemon franchise just brief, because there are a lot of people out there that have done great videos about the history of Pokemon, and I really don't want to. I mean, all I can really talk about for me personally or contribute is to how Pokemon experience affected my life, and that's fine. I think that's enough for definitely for a podcast. But really, this is, if you really wanted to see a Pokemon history, I recommend checking out the Jay Witz's videos or Tamashi Hiroka's videos, or even the Brandon to the Past, or I recommend checking out those YouTubers, because they've got some pretty cool background information about the very, very long and detailed and rich history of the Pokemon franchise. But needless to say, Pokemon is a creation of a man named Satoshi Tajiri. It is a property that is owned by Nintendo, Game Freak, Creatures Incorporated, and the Pokemon Company. It's got a very interesting relationship with their publisher, Nintendo, in that Pokemon, while it is Nintendo published, has the ability to basically branch out into things that are more than just video games. It's probably, I would say, arguably, it is the most successful video game franchise when it comes to marketing and collectibles and basically non-game related stuff. To say nothing of all of the games that have come out for it. This Pokemon has had an ongoing television series for the past 20 years. They have released, I would say, I think they've released about 18 to 20 movies by this point. I can't remember the exact amount of movies, and honestly, I haven't even seen them all. I've seen a bunch of them, but I haven't seen them all. There have been there's an ongoing trading card game that has been going on for at least the past 15 to 16 years in the United States. There has been an ongoing manga series in Japan and the United States. There have been collectibles, plush toys, so many plush toys and collectibles that even the manufacturers can't remember how many of them they made. To say nothing of the fan contributions that have been made about this, whether it be in the form of YouTube videos, parody videos, background history videos, retrospectives, fan fiction, fan art. Pokemon is an incredible franchise that has endured and survived better than any other game franchise that I can even think of to this point. And that's a testament to the fact that that franchise basically can last. That's a franchise that knows no gender. It knows no age. Anybody can pick up and play it. And it's going to, it's got mediums that can be enjoyed. It can be enjoyed in almost any medium available to consumers or to gamers. And that's a testament to Nintendo. That's a testament to the Pokemon Company. That's a testament to Satoshi Tajiri himself. He created something that could be enjoyed by anyone, and that means that everyone in the world is enjoying it. And props, because they really are great games. But I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. My first experience with Pokemon is a bit cloudy to me. Pokemon came out probably when I know for a fact that Pokemon came out in the United States and started picking up popularity when I was in high school, but I can't remember exactly what year I was in high school. I can't remember if I was a freshman. I can't remember. But what I do, and I don't remember exactly what I saw first. There were two major things that were happening around 1999 or 2000. And I can't remember what my first exposure to Pokemon was. But these were the two stories that I'll tell you guys, and you can pick for yourself, because I can't remember which one came first. One was that I would usually eat lunch with my friends when we were in high school. I had a bunch of friends, including Twitch, where we would sit together during lunch, and we'd basically do stuff like debate Star Wars video games and play Whose Line Is It Anyway and have our lunch. And, it was a circle of about 5 or so friends. One day, my friends pulled out their Game Boys and they started playing this new, they plugged in their link cables and they started battling each other with a new video game for the Game Boy that I wasn't familiar with. Now, my history with the Game Boy is a little bit iffy, but needless to say, it was this. I actually had an original model Game Boy, the very first Model 1 that was released in the United States, the big brick. I still have it. It still works. But by that point, this was around 99 or so, the Game Boy itself was obsolete. And I was kind of, by that point, you'd already had the Game Boy Pocket, which was out and could play, Game Boy games better, use less batteries, was, sharper screen, all that good stuff. So most people that I remembered were playing Game Boy Pockets, and this was around the same time where the Game Boy Color was coming out as well. So I wasn't exactly ready to just pull out my original model Game Boy and start using it. And I only had 2 games for it, Super Mario Land and Tetris, because those were the gifts that I got when I got the Game Boy, and I couldn't afford, I had no job, I had no income. I couldn't afford to buy, new video games. So that's what happened. But I was fascinated by this new game that my friends were playing. And so I asked them, well, what are you guys playing? And they said, oh, we're playing this new game called Pokemon. And what you do is you link up you can link up your games using a link cable, and we can actually battle each other in a digital arena. Now, I grew up by this point I already got into the PC. I was a hardcore PC gamer, a member of the elite PC gaming master race, if you will. And so I knew multiplayer. I knew LANs. I knew internet play. I knew, seeing two players link up their Game Boys like that to play a versus game against each other, even though it was an RPG, was charming to me. Because I couldn't just, even though, like, I don't think I had a laptop at the time, but, laptops existed. I was charmed by the fact that these two guys could play a game against each other with handheld devices that they could simply fit in their pocket. They didn't need to lug around heavy computers or heavy laptops. And even though PDAs were around, most PDAs were used for things like notes and calendars and maybe some very limited web surfing and emails. I hadn't really seen PDA programs specifically at that time that were designed for multiplayer video games on that scale. So I was impressed by what they were capable of doing. They could trade they could battle, they could check their statistics, and I asked could I get a chance to play their game for myself to see what I thought about it, and they said, yeah, here, you can reset the game, but just don't save. And I was pretty good about that. I didn't wipe anybody's game out as far as I can remember. And I was charmed by the game's opening and how fascinating it was and how the art style looked and the music and everything. And I was very impressed by it. But I kind of felt a bit bad because I knew I couldn't afford to pick up a copy for myself. So that's the first story. The second story is there was a channel that was a broadcast channel, which is not around anymore, called the WB Network. It was a broadcast channel like ABC and CBS and NBC, which you could pick up on your non-cable connected television. And this was in the heyday, around 1999. The WB was in their heyday for Saturday morning cartoon programming and their weekday after-school programming as well. They had picked up the Batman and Superman franchise, as well as other franchises like the Men in Black and and previously it had been Earthworm Jim and Freakazoid. Let me tell you something. I thought that out of all of the broadcast networks, because everybody was vying, this was before the days of Cartoon. Well, it may not have been before the days of Cartoon Network, but I know for a fact that we didn't get Cartoon Network until many years after everybody else did. And so basically, after school, you'd simply turn on a broadcast network, and they would be playing cartoons. They don't really do that anymore nowadays. The kids' network specifically monopolized that. But at the time, you could do that. And what I would usually do every day was, my dad had this little broadcast television, a color broadcast television, an old one, but it worked. And you could pick up like channels like the WB and ABC and stuff like that on it. And I would get on my computer, log into the internet, and surf the web while I was watching whatever was on whatever was on broadcast television, because my father didn't have cable TV in his office just yet. And that's usually what I would do for the first couple of hours after school every day. And so the TV didn't have a remote, so I would simply just turn it to the WB network and just leave it on while I was web surfing. And I would do that to watch Batman and Superman. And after a couple of years passed and the scheduling starts, focusing around, the WB network started adding in new shows. And one of the shows that they added in was a show called Pokémon, which I didn't really have interest in, if I remember correctly. So what would happen would be, I'd watch like Men in Black or Batman or Superman or something, and the show would end, and then Pokemon would go on right afterwards. And I'd either usually change the station or I'd leave it running because I was too busy on the web to get up to change the channel because I didn't have a remote. And I don't know what happened, but at some point during these, a couple of days basically of this happening, I just didn't bother changing the station, and so I left Pokemon running on the on the TV. This was probably like the first or the second season of Pokemon the animated series was broadcasting on the WB at the time, for those of you who really want to know specifically what was showing. And after a while of basically listening to the show while I was doing other things and the show being on and seeing the art style and seeing, and seeing the universe as displayed on the television, being someone who was always fascinated by new technology, I slowly started becoming interested in the show, and eventually got to a point where I would start watching the show. And I can't think of another time where that type of thing has happened, where simply just having a show on and then slowly becoming interested in it due to its quality was a thing that's ever happened to me. Usually if I watch a television show, I usually have intent to watch it, either because I was interested in seeing it on the information bar, or I'd seen advertising for it, or something along those lines. And if it was bad, I just stopped watching and never watch it again. But Pokemon made me a watcher. Pokemon made me a viewer because of its quality. Like I said, there was a lot about the show and the show's story, but mostly it was the show's universe, the world that the show existed in, where you had these characters that could do all these fascinating things like dial each other up through computers and have Skype conversations, what we would call today. That was really not possible on that scale and that quality back then. But these characters could do that. I thought it was so cool. Characters being able to transfer items and catching creatures and stuff like that, and battling their creatures over the course of an episode. The drama that was going on between the characters and the acting quality and all that stuff, it drew me in. And so it came that I started watching the series on a more regular basis, and I was very excited about it. I thought it was a good series. Okay, so that was my background in the Pokemon franchise. Those were my first experiences. Now you're probably wondering, well, okay, when did you first start playing the game? And that's a bit of a tricky question to answer, because by this point, Pokemon Yellow had come out, and it looked like, out of all the reports that I was getting, this was the definitive game to check out, especially if you like the Pokemon anime. It had a lot of the features from both Red and Blue mixed in, and even though you still wouldn't be able to catch all the Pokemon in that one game, you would have to still link cable with other games. You could still, it was possible you get a Pikachu, you could get a Squirtle, you could get a Charmander, you can get a Bulbasaur, and all of the evolutions of those Pokemon throughout the game's, story. And it had a couple of extra special features, like the ability to have a Pikachu follow you around. And so my attention immediately went to playing and picking up Pokemon Yellow. Now, I never bought a copy of Pokemon Yellow, but I did play Pokemon Yellow. I think I borrowed a friend's copy, if I remember. I think a friend let me borrow it and let me play their copy. And as I started playing it. So I started playing Pokemon Yellow. This was probably around 2000, 2001. I can't remember. And I remember enjoying the story. I played through the story, and I was enjoying the story quite a lot. I enjoyed the game's, most of anything, I enjoyed the game's world, just as I thought I would. It was awesome to see such detail and craft. I'll use that term, craft, in a Game Boy title. I was just used to simple black and white, platforming or puzzles. This was a full RPG with 30 hours of gameplay and a save anywhere option. Perfectly crafted to the handheld, but also an amazing title that rivaled some of the games that I was playing on other platforms at the time. So I could tell that this game was, that everybody had been saying about this game was true. That the game was worthy of all the praise that it had been getting. But that having been said, this was before I was really getting into RPGs. I was a first-person shooter player for the most part, or a third-person shooter. player. It wouldn't be until Anachronox came out that I really started playing RPGs or understanding how RPGs worked. I went into that game with very little strategy. And it showed because I was never able to finish it. My first playthrough of Pokemon Yellow, I was never able to catch a Snorlax. I could only catch an Articuno. I could never catch a Moltres or a Zapdos. No matter how many times I tried to catch a Moltres, I could never catch a Moltres. And I could never even find where the Zapdos was. And in case you're curious, well, how far could I make it in the game? I made it as far as the Pokemon Champion. And this was where you could really tell, well, okay, Maniac didn't really know didn't really know all the understanding. But take into account that not everybody knew exactly what was going on in this game. While there was walkthrough information available, it was harder to find stuff like typing and type advantages and stuff like that. And I wasn't of a mind where, I hadn't gotten there yet where I was like, oh, I'll use this type against this type. I would basically be like, well, this particular Pokemon with this attack is doing the most damage. I'll just continue using that. Or it's doing good enough damage. I'll just keep using that. Essentially, I kept running out of power points. And that was my Achilles heel when it came down to the Elite Four. I could train a team of Pokemon good enough to battle the Elite Four, but once they got to the Pokemon League champion, and I won't spoil who he is, I'm sure everybody knows who he is, but yeah, you know who he is. I would essentially run out of power points that could do damage. And I would basically run out of, and I had made the mistake to save after every battle. So essentially, because I thought I was only going to be fighting four trainers, I didn't know I was going to be battling a fifth. I basically just battled myself into a corner, and I gave up. I could never beat the final trainer. I just gave up. And I was so mad about that I basically never picked up the game again. And I was like, I will have to retrain an entire team from scratch just to battle the Elite Four and the champion. I didn't know I was going to have to do that, And so I simply, I didn't have the patience or the attention to just reset the game from scratch and battle all the way through to 30 hours all over again with a team specifically designed for the Elite Four. And I gave my friend his copy back, and that was the end of it, basically. So, after being exposed to the Pokemon game itself, and finding a lot to enjoy about it, but also realizing that it just wasn't something I was ready to really get into, I gave my friend his copy back, and all eyes started to turn to Generation 2. The problem was that I knew for a fact that everyone knew for a fact that Generation 2 was going to be Game Boy Color exclusive, and I didn't have a Game Boy Color. Most of my peers, my friends, all had upgraded to the Game Boy Color by this point. It was already available for at least a year by that point. And since it was backwards compatible, most people were using it to play the Pokemon Gen 1 games. So you would find a lot of people with Game Boy Colors and they'd still be playing Pokemon Blue or Pokemon Yellow. And it was cool because Pokemon Yellow actually had a color palette that would take advantage of the Game Boy Color. So that was something that was pretty sweet. It was also cross-compatible with a link cable adapter. So a lot of people who bought link cables for their systems could get a link cable that had multiple inputs and outputs. Nintendo made one, especially since they didn't bundle link cables with the Game Boys anymore. When I had a Game Boy, they actually did bundle the link cable with them. But I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. I was still watching the anime, but it was winding down its story, and a lot of it had kind of started becoming redundant. Most of the anime that followed the practice of the video game seemed pretty interesting to me, especially whenever Ash would do something storyline involved, like battle a gym leader or something. But at this point, when after Ash defeated the Viridian City gym leader, it they the producers for the series basically spent a lot of time in a lot of episodes basically with the same story. Ash is training for the Pokemon League Championships. Ash is training for that. And after a while, watching the what's felt like the 50th episode of that happening, I started, my interest in the Pokemon animated series started to wane. But it didn't kill my interest in Pokemon entirely. I was just becoming less interested in watching it. I was kind of hoping for new episodes. And once they got to the Orange Islands, I started becoming interested again. So, that's neither here nor there. But we also knew that there was going to be a Pokemon movie coming out. And if I remember correctly, that summer was a summer that I was working, and there was just no way that I could actually take the time off to go and see the movie, which is really disappointing because I did want to see it, especially having been a fan of the animated series. But I didn't get a chance to go see it in the theaters. I was either working in class, working at school. I can't remember, or I just simply didn't have the money, or none of my friends wanted to go see. I can't remember, but needless to say, I didn't go see any of the Pokemon movies in theaters. Meanwhile, interest in Pokemon started picking up for Generation 2. And having not had a Game Boy Color, I knew that I wouldn't be able to pick one up. And again, I wouldn't have been able to have afforded one. And that was going to be my Achilles heel there. I think eventually some of my peers, not close friends of mine, but peers, classmates, that sort of thing, did pick up Gold and Silver and started playing it. And I think my first exposure to Gold and Silver, and I know for a fact that a lot of people think that Gold and Silver are probably their favorite games of the entire Pokemon franchise, and they're fine for having that opinion. My first experience, I can't remember if he was playing Gold or Silver, was talking to a classmate of mine while the teacher was absent. He was playing either Gold or Silver on his Game Boy Color, and he was raving about how great it was and all the new Pokemon that he could capture and all the new stuff and how expansive the new game was. And so I said, "Oh, where's Ash?" And he says, "Oh, you don't play as Ash in this game. You play as a new character. But Ash is in the game. You battle him as he's like the secret final boss." And while I should have been excited about that, at the time I felt, especially having been such a fan of the animated series, I couldn't wrap my head around a Pokemon game where you did not play as that character. Where you played as a new character. And now, looking back on it, I totally understand that. You want to tell a new story every time from a new character's perspective, and it helps to have a new character. It just does. I get that now. But at the time, I was of a mind where if you're going to have a sequel, it helps to have that main character. I was like, I have an attachment to that main character from that original game. If I play a sequel, I want to be able to know what's happening with those characters. And while I feel like, having looked back on it, Pokemon Gold did do that. I couldn't see that at the time. And that culminated with something else happening when I finally did get a chance to see Pokemon, the first movie, after it came to VHS and home video. I didn't like it. I thought the movie had a great beginning. I thought the movie had a great rising story. I thought everything leading up to the finale of the movie was interesting and exciting. I thought the animation was great. I thought the acting was good. I thought the storyline was interesting, especially finally learning about Mewtwo's background and stuff like that. I thought all of that was great. And then I felt like I was just slapped in the face for a series that was it seemed like it was so grounded in some type of reality that a person could be brought to life just by crying. That really hurt. I thought to myself, I'm not, I'm a teenager at this point. I'm not watching these Disney movies where, I was kind of, I thought that Pokemon was more of a grounded series. This tier stuff is just fantastical. It just rubbed me the wrong way. It felt like it wasn't. It felt like it wasn't Pokemon. It felt like this was not something. This was something that was antithetical to the Pokemon universe, or it just felt out of place. And I didn't like the ending at all at the time. Now, looking back on it, my opinion has changed. But that was, to me, another reason maybe I should move on. And I'm just going to say this right now, even to this day, and I know I held off doing this podcast until I at least started to play some of the some of the Pokemon games, because people don't want me to just. I haven't played Gen 2. I know, this is not good, because a lot of people really like Gen 2. For a lot of people, it's their favorite generation, but I haven't played it. I'm sorry. I will play it in a heartbeat. I will buy it day one if Nintendo ever bothers to re-release it on the Pokemon 3DS. On the 3DS eShop, like they did for Generation 1. I will admit this. I will buy Gen 2 day one, guaranteed. I will pay full price for it and buy it. I'll probably buy Crystal, but I will buy it. It's just Nintendo has not been re-releasing those games in a timely manner. I had been asking Nintendo and the Pokemon Company to re-release just Generation 1 non-stop for the past 8 years. And it took them 8 years after they had the option and the distribution network to re-release the Pokemon games digitally. It took them 8 years to do so. Yeah. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I'll back off. So I missed out on Generation 2. And I never picked up a Game Boy Advance, even though I really should have. It was the only game in town when it came down to handhelds at that point. Nintendo pretty much dominated the handheld gaming scene, even though they weren't totally dominating the console scene anymore. If you wanted to play a handheld game, you basically bought yourself a Game Boy. It's just that simple. But even though these things were not expensive, the first Game Boy Advance system to come out had a lot of problems with it, in particular its lack of backlighting. And even though there was no other option but to get a Game Boy Advance, and it started getting some really good games for it, like Legend of Zelda, The Minish Cap, and stuff like that eventually. And of course, the third generation Pokemon games would be released exclusively for that handheld. A lot of people said, oh, the screen is hard to read. There's a lot of problems. What's the point of playing a good game if you can't really even see what's going on? And so I use that as an excuse to hold off on purchasing it. To say nothing of the fact, well, I couldn't afford one. You're going to find this a lot with this. A running theme, basically, with this podcast is going to be, I could not afford it. I could not afford it. I mean, I'm not, I make money, but I don't usually make that much money to buy a new handheld or buy a new gaming system. Occasionally I can, I had a PC, and most of the time if I was playing a game, it was just simply picking up new PC titles. That's all I was basically doing for gaming, which was fine for me because I was enjoying my PC titles. This was like a good heyday for PC. But it meant that I had to miss out on other platforms and and games that went to those other platforms, with very few exceptions. So that's what happened there. Generation 3 would come out for the Game Boy Advance, but there were several problems with it that didn't merit me being interested in them. One was the fact that they were for the Game Boy Advance, and I would have had to have bought a Game Boy Advance, which I couldn't afford. The second was that I had heard that the games were not as good as Generation 2. For most people, even to this day, they consider Generation 2 to be the best that was ever done. When you follow up with that, even with the improved graphical systems, from a 8-bit, graphics to 32-bit graphics, it still was a smaller environment. There wasn't the end game like there was for Generation 2. If a lot of people basically just passed. And I think at that point, the Pokemania was finally just starting to cool off. Interest was really starting to wane in the TV series. I wasn't watching the TV series after the Orange Islands, basically. Interest was waning in the movies. Pokemania had finally started. People were starting to rebel against Pokemania. And it started having a falling off, probably around the time shortly after the first games in Generation 3 came out. To say nothing of the fact that Generation 3 broke compatibility with Generations 1 and 2. You couldn't transfer your Pokemon, your game states, or anything along those lines to the new Pokemon titles. They just were not compatible, which sucked. Because I know that there were a lot of people, even to this day, that wanted to bring their Pokemon to the new handheld games. So there was no way, basically, to complete the Pokédex with Generation 3s, either with Ruby or Sapphire. You couldn't complete the Pokédex. It was impossible. And that, I think, rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. Eventually, when they re-released the first generation for the Game Boy Advance to help people in completing the Pokédex, and while those games were exciting and, it was a great way to get into the games if you were a new player, I never picked those up either. Even though, in hindsight, I probably should have. They fixed a lot of the problems with Generation 1, they fixed a lot of the bugs. They allowed people to play as a female Pokemon trainer, which you couldn't do in Generation 1, even though I think it was planned you could. You couldn't actually in the original versions of Generation 1. And by having those games, you could finally complete the Pokédex in Generation 3. I kind of was like, you know what, I'll hold off until they release if they ever release a yellow or something, I may pick up a Game Boy Advance. By this point, I think the Game Boy Advance SP was out. And I was really looking for an excuse to pick one up, but I wasn't really seeing one. And again, in hindsight, I probably should have done that. And so I never really played any of the original versions of Generation 3. Sorry. By this point, I'm going to have to fast forward because at this point, I kind of started losing interest. I wasn't really following Pokemon at this point. Heck, I wasn't really following Pokemon's story all the way through at least past Generation 2's release. I had to do my research onto what was going on at those times. But I have to say that, unfortunately, I wasn't actively following any of this. I was more interested in picking up the new consoles and stuff like that. I had a GameCube, I admit this, but I never played any of the Pokemon titles for the GameCube. Again, something I tremendously regret. But I was more interested in playing games like Halo and Metal Gear Solid and stuff like that. So, again, I won't get into that because I might as well just fast forward. Eventually, the Nintendo DS comes out. It gets a lot of hype. A lot of people are interested in it. I picked up the Sony PSP. Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed having a Sony PSP. I really enjoyed the platform's exclusives. But, yeah, again, I never picked up any of the DS line. And so I never picked up Pokemon Diamond or Pearl. Yeah. So that passed me by. I picked up a Wii. I picked up Metroid. I picked up Zelda. I picked up Mario games for it. I picked up Super Smash Brothers for it. Never picked up a Pokemon game for it. But I was kind of hoping that once the Wii came out, that Nintendo could offer, because they offered older titles through the Wii downloadable, the downloadable, I guess you would call it the Wii Shop channel back then. But the Wii Shop channel had a virtual console menu where you could basically go back and download and play on the Wii all kinds of classic Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Nintendo 64 titles, and, on the Wii. Part of the reason why I bought a Wii in the first place was not just because I wanted to play Wii titles, but I wanted the opportunity to go back and replay games from my childhood, like Super Mario Brothers or Super Mario Brothers 3. just all those great games that were out originally for the NES and games that I missed out because I never had a Super Nintendo and I never had a Nintendo 64. So I really wanted the opportunity to go back and replay some of those great titles from the previous stuff, like Zelda Ocarina of Time or Star Fox 64, a game that I loved playing with my friend L Train. I really wanted to play Link to the Past finally. I was able to get all those games, and I was thinking to myself, this virtual console is a great opportunity for Nintendo to re-release Game Boy titles. Why haven't they done that? It would only make sense. There were a lot of great Game Boy titles like Super Mario Land or the original Tetris for Game Boy they could re-release. Heck, they could re-release the original Pokemon games through this service, and I would download them in a second and replay them. I always wanted to get I always wanted an opportunity after that point to go back and replay the first Pokemon, generation, so I could finally defeat go back and replay it, and I was ready. But by that point, Nintendo was more focused on releasing new hardware. They were not interested in releasing Game Boy games for the Wii Virtual Console. And so, while I could play some of the great console games, Pokemon was just not something that they were re-releasing. I kind of sidetracked a bit here when I was talking about the Wii hardware. I kind of neglected to mention the release of the 4th generation games on the Nintendo DS. And let me tell you something, the 4th generation games were a very, very, very big deal when they came out. They were just incredible titles that everybody who picked up the DS really wanted to look into. Let's face it, when you think about it, the Nintendo DS hardware on its own was the perfect hardware to design a Pokemon game for. And I'm sure that Nintendo thought about that when they were designing the DS in the first place. The touchpad was very intuitive. The controls were simplistic enough to be able to follow. The two screens were a good novelty that could make use for RPGs. And this was the most important thing, there were multiple different wireless connectivity options with the device. The device had an IR transmitter, it had but the big deal was it had wireless Ethernet and wireless LAN and wireless internet capabilities. That was a very important deal. Because if you remember from the end of the 3rd generation, when Generation 1 was re-released, one of the first things that Nintendo offered with the Gen 3 re-releases were wireless connectivity adapters for the Game Boy Advance hardware. For the DS, those features were basically in the box, in the hardware automatically. No need for an adapter. And this was a big deal because now Nintendo could finally release a Pokemon game, that could connect directly to the internet. This was big. This was very big. And I remember seeing footage of the release of the Generation 4 games, Diamond and Pearl, and at Nintendo New York, and seeing, wow, these games were very, very, very looked forward to. Unfortunately, I haven't played Generation 4. Sorry. I can't really comment that much about it, except in a couple of cases for a couple of quick anecdotes that I just want to give really quick. While I haven't played Generation 4 yet, or of any of the games, I did pick up the eventual Generation 4 re-release called Pokémon Platinum. However, while Pokémon Platinum added a lot of new features to the game and stuff like that, there were a lot of new options that you had in-game, it also took away compatibility with certain Wii titles, including My Pokémon Ranch and Pokémon Battle Revolution. So if you happen to have a copy of Diamond and Pearl, don't trade it in for a copy of Pokemon Platinum. Play Pokemon Platinum separately on its own. You might as well just have all 3 games on, in your library. But I never had a copy of Diamond or Pearl. I did get a copy of Platinum on eBay. I'm not 100% certain about its accuracy, but I'm pretty certain it's on the up and up. I think what happened was the guy just had opened it up and then resealed it, but as far as I can tell, the game is fine and it was never played, so, I don't really have a problem with that. On top of the Generation 4 titles, the new Generation 4 titles, which like I said, I've never played, Nintendo decided to do a re-release very similar to how they re-released the Generation 1 games on the Game Boy Advance. Nintendo decided to re-release the Generation 2 games as Heart Gold and Soul Silver for the Nintendo DS and release them right after the Generation 4. Now, the cool thing about Heart Gold and Soul Silver, which is what I really want to talk about here, is that all new copies of Heart Gold and Soul Silver were bundled with a new piece of hardware, I don't know what to call it really. Accessory, I guess, would be the best word for the Nintendo for the Nintendo DS, and for the specifically made for these Pokemon games, Pokemon Heart Gold and Pokemon Soul Silver, basically increasing their value tremendously. And of course, you guys know, if you've picked up these games or if you've heard about them, you know that I'm talking about, of course, the Pokewalker accessory. The Pokewalker is just a piece of genius from beginning to end. It's designed just like a Pokeball with a screen on it, a simple little LCD screen with very simple outputs, kind of like a Tamagotchi or something like that from the late 90s, early 2000s. But the thing that made this Pokewalker so important was it added a lot of features that enhanced its capabilities and enhanced the capabilities of anybody that was playing the game, that was playing either Heart Gold or Soul Silver. You could transfer Pokemon to the Pokewalker and level it up without having to bring your DS with you, your game, or have your game running in active memory. This was a very big deal. It was a forefront for what we'd eventually have with our smartphones, where you'd have games that could play themselves, or games that could be played or could be trusted to run on their own while you were away. And or that you could program to do a certain thing and come back later on and check how it was doing. That kind of stuff is very common now when it comes to Facebook titles and in a lot of smartphone titles. But I'm just going to say it right now, it seems like Nintendo was the first to do this. The Pokewalker by itself was, like I said, was saying before, it was a very simple accessory. It was powered by a simple watch battery. It's kind of similar to what you'd find either a watch or, I don't know, holding the save game for an old Nintendo cart. It would, it had wireless connectivity, which I can't remember if it's using infrared or something else, like RFID or something. It had several interface buttons, but it also had a step counter. So the coolest thing about that was that at the time it was released, a lot of people were doing the numbers. Step counters were not uncommon at that time. Even step counters in the very similar design to the Pokewalker existed by this point. But the Pokewalker, after numerous tests were done, was considered to be the most accurate step counter of its day. And it was $20, it came in a $40 video game. So go figure about that one. It also had a lot of features that you'd later find in games like the Pokemon Dream Radar and stuff like that, almost like a forefront for that. You might be able to pick up Pokemon just using the Pokewalker while you were on the go. You might be able to, and then you could transfer those games or any Pokemon that you captured to your main title. You could also transfer data if you happen to come across another Pokemon trainer with a Pokewalker. You could interact with them using the transmitters in both of your Pokewalkers and get bonuses and things like that with them. It was a great device. I'm afraid I don't have too many personal anecdotes about seeing the Pokewalker in action. However, I have heard some very interesting stories, some of which may be true, it might not be, that I kind of thought I'd want to mention here, just to give you guys a really simple counter on how this kind of thing worked or how ubiquitous it was. People brought those things to conventions, and in fact, I remember hearing a story, I can't remember, I think it might have happened in PAX Prime, where a bunch of Pokemon fans, again, this was years ago, this had to have been easily, prior to 2010. And if this is true, if this is not true, please just post a comment, but this is just a story that I read from a journalist that was attending the event, and mentioned that a bunch of attendees in cosplay decided to have their own little Pokemon league while they were attending the event, and Pokemon trainers in the who were attending the event, just any type of Pokemon trainer, were welcome to challenge actually these gym leaders who would be carrying around Pokewalkers and DSs. And so anybody could just, stake out a claim, be in cosplay, be a trainer, and travel from gym leader to gym leader trying to catch all the badges, basically. That would have been so freaking awesome. I wish I could have seen an event like that happen at a convention that I attended. Heck, maybe events like that have happened. I have attended a convention where one of the panels was basically designed as a Pokemon Pokemon Center, which was like a real-life Pokemon Center, basically, where people were expected to battle and trade. The only thing that that event panel was missing was a live feed of Twitch Plays Pokemon, which was going on at the time, actually. It would have been cool to see, because it was taking place in a high-tech classroom. They could have piped in a video feed of something, so it would have been cool to see, like, player statistics or something going on, for, that was Pokemon-related while everybody was battling and trading. And street passing and stuff like that. So, but I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. The thing that I think is most important about the Pokewalker is that because even though the Pokewalker still works and is a ubiquitous portion of, I think, technology history, it certainly left its footnote in the DS's eventual successor, which I'm going to talk about in just a minute. A lot of the features that were in the Pokewalker were in the next handheld, making the Pokewalker a little bit obsolete. But not only that, a lot of the same features that were in the Pokewalker that a lot of people take for granted are now finding its way into new devices that people are purchasing, like Fitbits or the Apple Watch, for example, which are designed to have not just be all-in-one inclusive technologies, but with they have all health focuses and stuff like that, or they offer the user health and nutrition options. Very similar technology to the Pokewalker is in those devices, and you all have, I'm just going to say it right now, you all have Nintendo to thank for that. So, moving on. So, Nintendo announces what their next handheld is going to be. It's going to be called the Nintendo 3DS. And immediately there are people that are very happy about this, and immediately there are people that are not very happy about this. I was kind of sitting in the middle on the fence about it, particularly because I was looking forward to Sony's next handheld, which was going to be the PSP successor, but also for the fact that a lot of people were looking at it like it's not much of an evolutionary leap over the DS. The hardware was great, don't get me wrong, but it still kind of used the DS form factor. It was still going to use two screens, one of which being a touchscreen. But it seemed like out of the box, the only thing that it was bringing to the table was that the screen was going to be slightly wider, and it was going to be a 3D screen as opposed to a 2D screen. But you wouldn't need glasses, so that was kind of innovative. Again, I stayed on the fence about it. When it finally was released, a lot of people appreciated the fact that it had access to DSi games for an online marketplace. It had all kinds of new features built into it that people could take advantage of, which was also cool. It had 3D cameras and stuff like that, which was also great. Had a way for, friends lists and communications and stuff. And not only could it play 3DS exclusive titles, it could also play DS exclusive titles as well. So anybody that had a DS or a DSi could bring their titles, trade their old system in, bring their titles, both digital and retail ones, to the new 3DS without much of a problem. And so I thought to myself, well, in this new handheld, there's an opportunity not only for me to play the new the new 3DS titles, but since it can play DS games, there are literally at that point there was literally like a laundry list of just regular DS titles that I really wanted to play. And I looked at this 3DS like it could be an opportunity for me to finally be able to play them. And a friend of mine got their hands on a 3DS. They were a diehard DS user. They liked it. But I don't remember. I remember that the initial price of $250 was pretty steep. And it was pretty clear that once the initial bit of diehard Nintendo loyalists bought it, it wasn't really meeting a mass market. It just wasn't meeting the mass markets. It wasn't selling like it was supposed to. And so Nintendo responded by heavily slashing the price down from $250 to $269, or it's 207. I'm sorry, to $169. Essentially cutting out a good chunk of what could have been their profit for it. They wanted these things to sell. And this was before even the PSP successor was ever really, we knew Sony was going to release a successor to the PSP by this point. We didn't even have a name for it, but this was before that handheld even came out. So Nintendo took a severe chance with that price cut. And they made nice with the people that bought it. They gave them a whole bunch of free games, some of which that are not even available for purchase. They gave them a whole slew of free downloadable titles. Good for, that's pretty awesome. Because they never released a lot of them for the 3DS since. But when I was reading the initial reviews of the hardware, I was not impressed by a couple of things, particularly the size of the screen was a bit too small. A lot of people said the hardware, while it's supposed to be a handheld, is a bit too small. And that affects, and while the 3D effect works, they thought it could work better on a larger screen. They say nothing of other, issues that it had. They didn't like the telescoping or collapsible stylus. The people had some problems with it. So I held off. But as the year progressed, more and more titles started coming out for both the DS and the 3DS, and were being promised for both systems, that really piqued my interest. Personally, for me, off the top of my head, I can think of New Super Mario Bros. 2, Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon, a bunch of cool titles that were coming exclusively to the 3DS that I wouldn't be able to pick up or play. And those games interested me. I really wanted to play those games. On the side note, there were also DS titles coming out. While Pokemon was now in its 5th generation of games, Nintendo was planning on releasing a sequel to the Generation 5, Pokemon Black 2 and Pokemon White 2. And those games would be playable on both the DS and the 3DS. And meanwhile, Black and White, the other two 5th generation games, were still available for me to purchase in stores if I so much as wanted them. I could find them in stores, no problem. And I think what put me over the limit was pretty much a storm was brewing, basically. A storm of fandom was kind of brewing behind Pokemon. In 2012, Pokemania was having a bit of resurgence, particularly with fan projects. People had reviewed Generation 5, and those games were actually doing quite well. People really, really enjoyed Generation 5. And I'll talk more about that later. But not only was that doing very well, a lot of people were coming back and doing fan projects that were Pokemon related. And I was attending all of these conventions. Like, for the first time ever, conventions were being hosted where I was, and where I lived, and I was, fan conventions, fandom conventions, anime conventions, and gaming conventions and stuff like that. And I could go and I could check out these conventions because they were, a drive away, which is not usual for me. Usually, if I wanted to go to a convention, I'd have to fly. But local conventions were finally starting to spring up all over the place for me. And a lot of people were doing panels about Pokemon. And there was a bit of a storm, like a perfect storm basically, of several different panels hosted by a myriad of different people that really interested me at around the same time. One was a panel that was being done by a group, basically the Pokemon Bridge group. There were two people from Pokemon Bridge that appeared, Jesse Nowak and Michael Height. I believe I'm pronouncing it correctly, but the one kid's entertainment guy and Nowacking came over to my neck of the woods, and they did a panel about Pokemon Bridged, which is a parody series of the Pokemon animated series, which I really like. They basically took clips from Pokemon in the animated series and they dubbed them over with funny jokes and stuff like that. I wasn't familiar with the series until I saw it at the convention that they attended. But after I did see it, I don't know if it was nostalgia or a love for these original episodes. It made me think about how much I did love those episodes back in the day, and how much I missed out on all of these great Pokemon games that had been released over the past couple of years. And so I really became a fan of that series. So props to the Pokemon Bridge team for that. I really owe you guys for that one. And I later met the group. They're a great group. They really are. I met the whole team. They really are a great group. And moving on, there was another panel happening called Pokemon as a Mythic Narrative. And I think his name was Dunbar. I think it was a guy named Dunbar that did that panel. And again, this was a guy talking about all of the mythological history behind a lot of the most popular Pokemon for the past 5 generations. And a lot of them were, and basically also taking the Pokemon epic story about how the hero, and comparing it to basically the mythic work of guys like the guy who wrote The Hero of a Thousand Faces, Joseph Campbell. It was an amazing panel. It really was. The guy was amazing. It was cool to see this stuff that I hadn't really been paying attention to for the past couple of years being brought out, because I love watching History Channel documentaries, and I remembered loving that documentary about the making of Star Wars that was included on the Star Wars original trilogy box set, Empire of Dreams. That's a great documentary if you haven't seen it. Just all this stuff about mythology and everything else. I loved it. So that was another piece in the puzzle. What brought me over the edge was another series that was being done by that dude in the suede, now known as Suede. He was doing a review of the Pokemon animated series. I'm sorry, the Pokemon animated movies with Linkara and the late Juwario. And that was another, and again, so in 2012, it just seemed like there was a perfect storm of opportunity and fandom, and all this stuff just started coming to me. And I just was like, I can't put off playing Pokemon anymore. I really, really, really want to get back into this series. But I kind of felt like I needed another push. Particularly, I was still mad at Nintendo for not releasing or re-releasing the original generation Pokemon titles. They were long out of print. And while it was easy to find recent Pokemon games on the DS, it was harder to find the Game Boy, and it was harder to find the Game Boy and some like Diamond and Pearl and stuff. So I think I needed something to push me over the edge. And then Nintendo announced that they were going to release a updated form factor for the 3DS called the 3DS XL. A larger 3DS that could still play 3DS and DS games, but it was faster, had better battery life, bunch of other features. Still no second analog stick, but that didn't really affect me much. And when that was announced, and I thought, okay, this thing can play that laundry list of DS games that I haven't been able to play. I can play Pokemon with this thing. I can play the new 3DS titles that I really want to play. Even because by that point, there was no Pokemon game announced for the 3DS. There was no 3DS exclusive Pokemon game coming out. The only, we were still in 5th gen. 6th gen had not been announced yet. But I said, I'm going to put a pre-order down for the 3DS XL. And I pre-ordered a blue 3DS XL. And that day, one of the first things I did after I set it up was I downloaded the free Pokédex, the Generation 5 Pokédex. Yeah, there actually was a Generation 5 Pokédex. A lot of people don't know this because it's not available anymore. But around the time Pokemon Black 2 and Pokemon White 2 came out, Nintendo released 2 companion apps, basically, for the Nintendo 3DS as downloadable titles. One was a Generation 5 Pokédex, which only had Generation 5 Pokemon included in it, but you could look up their information and stuff like that. And the other was a game called Pokemon Dream Radar, which was designed to interact directly with the version 2, with the Gen 5 version 2 games. so you could catch otherwise unavailable Pokemon with the app and transfer them to your game. That game you had to pay for though, but it was like I think it was like a fee of like $3 or so, give or take. So I downloaded the free Pokédex, and I think that was the start of my return to my love affair for Pokemon. Very quickly, I started just going crazy, probably crazier than I should have gone, and trying to get my hands on all of the Pokemon games that were available at a pretty reasonable price. By this point, like I said, Generation 5 had come out, but you could find both of the versions, all four of the Generation 5 games. I was kind of hoping that maybe they would have released a Pokemon Gray or something, but they never did. So I just picked up Black, I picked up White, I picked up Black 2, I picked up White 2. And then I tried to find any older games I could get my hands on. I found a copy of Pokemon Platinum on eBay. That was the best I could do. And but the one thing that I am proudest of, I actually found the Generation 2 remake for the DS, but I could never find a copy of Heart Gold, but I could find plenty of copies of Soul Silver, and those did include a Pokewalker, which I'll talk about in just a little bit. So I was on a bit of a buying kick, probably a bigger buying kick than I should have been. By the end of 2012, I hadn't played any of those games yet. I was trying to get my hands on as many as I could. What I really wanted to do, best case scenario, was re-buy all of the original Pokemon games I'd get my hands on and then play them in order. But I thought that might have been a bit of a problem, especially since even though by that point Nintendo had made a Virtual Console available on the 3DS platform, and you could purchase and download Game Boy and Game Boy Color games on it, as well as NES games. For some reason, Nintendo just didn't bother to release any of the Pokemon titles on it yet. Go figure. Don't ask me why. They were only the biggest selling titles on the Game Boy. But Nintendo just continued to hold off and defer re-releasing them. So, I also picked up a Wii U in 2012. And another reason why I picked up the Wii U was not just because I really wanted to play a lot of the Wii U exclusive titles because they impressed me, and I still have my Wii U. I like my Wii U. I think it's a great console. But that was another reason because Nintendo said that the Wii U would be able to play Game Boy Advance games through their Virtual Console, natively with the Wii U controller screen. So I thought, well, okay, if I get a 3DS, I can play Game Boy and Game Boy Color games on it. If Nintendo ever bothers to release Gen 1 or Gen 2, I could play them on the 3DS XL. If Nintendo ever tries to re-release Gen 3, they would do it on the Wii U. And so so that was another reason why I picked up a Wii U. Now again, Nintendo wasn't making any announcements like this, but I figured I bought it on the potential that they would. That was part of it. Meanwhile, I could, I had the 5th gen games, I had the 4th gen games, I had the 2nd generation remakes. And then 2013 came around, and the first video that Nintendo released in 2013 was a Pokemon Direct. And Nintendo officially announced that they were going to be releasing 6th generation titles, which would be 3DS exclusive with fully 3D Pokemon. And those games were going to be called Pokemon X and Pokemon Y. Well, I had to put pre-orders down for those games immediately. And I did. And for the first time ever in Maniac's history, he was there day and date for Pokemon X and Pokemon Y's release. And I picked up both of them. I pre-ordered both games. I picked up both of those games. I still have the posters that they offered for anybody who pre-ordered both of those games. You got an exclusive Pikachu poster and stuff like that. So I still have my original 6th gen pre-order posters, which were pretty cool, I thought. But I hadn't played any of them yet. Even though I was picking up the games, I was mostly treating this like a bit of a Pokemon collector. I was collecting the Pokemon games, but I hadn't just yet played them. I think part of it was kind of the reason why I just really didn't want to open the titles. I figured there was value to the games remaining unopened. And another reason was probably because I think I was still waiting for Nintendo to bother re-release Generation 1 or Generation 2. I thought, maybe now that Nintendo's releasing Gen 6 on the 3DS, I could find, they'll finally re-release Gen 1. Nope. In 2014, Nintendo announced that they were remaking the Generation 3 games for the 3DS using the Generation 6 engine, and they were going to be called Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. And of course, I picked those up. I had those games by Christmas. I didn't pick them up day and date, but I did pick them up by Christmas time. And at that point, when I was reading the reviews for Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, it became clearer and clearer to me that those would probably be the perfect games. I had given up by this point Nintendo ever bothering to release the Generation 1 or 2 games as downloadable titles. And I figured, well, these are technically Generation 3, which at this point are the earliest games I have in the time. Well, actually, I had the Generation 2 remakes, but I didn't want to open that just yet. I figured, I think it's time. I think it's time for me to finally start playing these games. Now, if you're going to get started with any Pokemon titles, I totally would recommend any of the 6th generation titles. You just buy any one of them and pick up and play. They're perfect for new Pokemon trainers. But if you're planning on playing the 3rd generation remakes, I would completely recommend, before starting your play on any of those retail titles, whether it be Alpha Sapphire or Omega Ruby, to download and play the demo for Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire on the 3DS off the Nintendo eShop. The reason why is because that demo serves as a prequel story to Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. You can actually transfer a lot of the stuff that you earn in the Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire demo, including a Galil or a Steelix if you're playing in Japan, that's capable of Mega Evolution, to the full version of your retail title. So before I finally cracked open my first Pokemon retail title in forever, I decided to download the first moment that it was made available. I think I had this demo was very, very heavily sought after. And what happened with it was that Nintendo didn't just release it on the Nintendo eShop and you could simply select it off a list or search for it or select it off a list. You needed to earn this demo in some way. And so what happened was Nintendo gave out download codes through various means. Some of them were through retail titles. I think they gave download codes out for anybody that picked up a copy of Pokemon Art Academy on the 3DS. They gave codes out through the Pokemon.com newsletter, which is where I got mine. And I think they were doing a mall tour or something like that where they were giving out codes for it as well. So this demo was sought after. Now, you can just download it off the eShop, so it's very easy to get now. But at the time, before Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire came out, it was very difficult to get this demo. Was the demo worth downloading? Well, it's a short demo, but it's a very replayable demo. The way the demo works is that you have like a new story every time you play, based upon certain mission random generator certain randomly generated mission parameters and stuff like that. It does take place before the events of Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, so there's no spoilers basically. You actually get some cool anticipation for locations that you're going to see later on in the game and characters that you're going to meet later on in the game. So it's cool for that. It sets the stage very well for playing the full retail title. And I would absolutely recommend it to anybody that has a 3DS. It's free to download. Go get it right now. But the best part was that you could take the certain bonuses that you would earn while playing it, depending on how many times you played and what missions you played and stuff like that. And you could take those to the full version. And that to me was what really interested me. So I downloaded that demo and I played it. And I enjoyed it. And then I played it again and again. I played it a lot. I was trying my best to unlock all of the possible outcomes that I could get, which is not easy to do, before I started playing either Omega Ruby or Alpha Sapphire. So leading up to Christmas time, I was replaying that demo a lot, because that's really the only Pokemon game which had, the playable Pokemon, which played like a Pokemon title. It had the RPG functions, everything else. It played like a Pokemon title, which I was actually playing. And I was replaying it quite a bit because I was too afraid to open up any of my copies of Pokemon. So for Christmas time, I picked up Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. And I was kind of hesitant to open them up until I finally unlocked everything in the demo. But I think it was after my friend told me he picked up a copy of Alpha Sapphire. I'm sorry, of Omega Ruby. That I thought, you know what? Since he's playing Omega Ruby, I'll play my copy of Alpha. I'll open my copy of Alpha Sapphire and I'll start playing it. And with all of the added functions that Nintendo and the Pokemon Company brought in for the third generation remakes to make it very accessible to new players, even if whether you were a new player or whether you were a classic player picking it up after a long time, this game was made for players to play. This made it very easy for me to pick up, because by this point I had learned stuff. You know, I've been watching all of these documentaries and stuff like that. I was watching YouTube videos, so I was learning about things like typing, or you know, and I was preparing my and buffs and debuffs and stuff like that. I had more experience with RPGs by this point. And so I opened up a copy of Alpha Sapphire, I popped it in my 3DS, and I started transferring my the stuff that I learned in the demo to the full retail title, but I just started playing it. And I don't know what it was about the game's presentation, the art style, the mechanics, but I felt like I had come home. It just warmed my heart to just finally be able to start playing this game. So I started playing Alpha Sapphire at pretty much the properly right time, because there were a lot of things that were working in my favor at around the same time as I started playing it. One was, obviously, I already had the demo characters unlocked, so I could transfer all the stuff that I had earned in the demo to the full version of the game. The second was that Nintendo was releasing and re-releasing a lot of Pokemon exclusives through various means as gifts to anybody that was currently playing Alpha Sapphire or Omega Ruby. They had given away 3 of, I think it was the 5th gen final evolutions, like Superior and Embor and Samurott, basically just using unlock codes as gifts. So I ended up downloading those three Pokemon and using them as I was playing through Alpha Sapphire. I don't think the Samurott or the Embor did me very good, but Superior, that one really did me a lot of good. I already had a fire type. I picked the fire type on my team already for. I was using a Blaziken basically, so I didn't really need Embor on my team, but I didn't really have a good grass type, and so having Superior on my team was so useful, especially when I was trying to capture new Pokemon. So, moving on, I kept up with basically playing it as stuff was being unlocked for it. Eventually, they re-released Diancie for it, and they also did giveaways with, like, I think it was like a Dragonite or something like that. They were giving away a lot of cool Pokemon. And I remember playing through it and making it all the way to the Elite Four. I don't want to spoil really what happens in Generation 3. You can just look it up, but I'll talk about the game's mechanics just briefly right now. The cool thing about it was that I didn't want to make the same mistake that I made when I originally played against the Elite Four for Pokemon Yellow. If I was planning on defeating the Elite Four, I was going to do it in one go, and I wasn't going to save during it. I didn't want to be like how it was that time I had played Pokemon Yellow, and I wasn't able to beat the Elite Four because I ran out of power points and moves and stuff like that. I didn't have enough attack moves, and I didn't learn typing and stuff like that. But this time, when I made it to Alpha Sapphire's Elite Four, I was ready. I had captured that game's legendary. I had that Mega Evolved Galeal on my team. I had, Superior on my team. I had my Blaziken on that team. I was ready. I was really ready to get going with this thing. I thought I was ready for the Elite Four this time. And I had taught them all attack moves. Like I said, I didn't trust buffs and debuffs. I was worried that I was going to run out of moves while I was basically going up against 8 trainers, hypothetically, with 6 Pokemon apiece. Or, I'm sorry, 5 trainers with hypothetically 6 Pokemon apiece. Even though I could use typing to my advantage, I was worried that using buffs and debuffs, since I wasn't planning on playing competitively, was not going to be very useful to me. I just wanted attack moves, attack moves, attack moves. moves that basically wouldn't do that much damage to my Pokemon either. I taught Flamethrower to my Blaziken, which was in hindsight very smart. And I moved on by basically continuing with those plans. And I made it to the Elite Four with that team, and I defeated the Elite Four in the Pokemon Champion. And for the first time ever, I had beaten a Pokemon title. And it felt really good. It felt so good to be able to be able to say that. The first Pokemon game I ever defeated was Alpha Sapphire. But that wasn't it. That wasn't anybody who's played the third gen remakes knows that just simply defeating the Elite Four and the Pokemon, it's not credits roll. That game is not over. Second you hit play again, it starts the Delta episode, which I thought was great. I mean, it kind of felt to me like a little bit of like a little free expansion pack. I know that a lot of people thought that the third generation remakes were not different enough to merit purchasing if you already had the original Gen 3 games, especially if you had a game like Emerald with you. But I disagree. I felt like there was enough of a difference and enough of an enhancement with the Generation 3 remakes that it merited picking up a purchase, even if you already had the Gen 3 games for the Game Boy Advance. And the Delta episode is just one piece of that. So I caught a Rayquaza, Mega Evolved it, and I made it to Deoxys, and I was ready for Deoxys. And I remember the night that I was going to finally finish the Delta episode, I was hanging out at my girlfriend's house, and I didn't know I was going to make it to Deoxys, and I made it to so I made it to Deoxys, and I was about to hit the fight button as the battle was about to start between Deoxys and Rayquaza, and I was planning on capturing Deoxys. And instead of hitting the fight button, I hit the run button. And that's accepted in that. That is actually accepted. And I got away, and it just ended the Delta episode without me fighting Deoxys, and I couldn't go. And thankfully, I did have a save before I started battling Rayquaza, but it meant I had to capture Rayquaza all over again. So that was annoying, but that was partially my fault. And I remember my girlfriend sitting next to me. She was watching TV. I was trying to beat the Gen 3 remake, and I finally did. But it would have been faster if I hadn't hit that run command. So that was a very positive experience for me. And then I thought, okay, I beat Alpha Sapphire. What's next? And I looked at the games I had on my shelf. I had Platinum, I had Black 2, I had Black, I had White 2, I had Soul Silver. And I thought to myself, what's next? I had X, I had Y. And I thought, well, I'm used to the mechanics that were established for Generation 6, like the XP share and all that other stuff. And so I thought it would make, and plus I had really wanted to play Pokemon X actually. Like out of all the games, I had seen previews for Pokemon X. I saw a really good Let's Play by the Video Games Awesome guys, and I really wanted to play Pokemon X actually. And I knew that a lot of people had been playing Y, and so I figured for diversity's sake, I would play X. So at this point, I started to play Pokemon X, the 6th generation Pokemon title. And let me tell you something, this was a good follow-up. Now, I was feeling good about choosing this game as the follow-up for playing Pokemon Alpha Sapphire. I know it was, at least chronologically speaking, the most recent Pokemon title, so it was like if I had to play some of the other games, I would be going backwards in the Pokemon timeline, depending upon whether or not. I consider the generations sequential, even though that's not canonical. I won't get into that, but at least not right now. But I figured, okay, I'll play that because I've played through Alpha Sapphire, and I figured X's gameplay will probably be pretty close. And I was right. The XP share obviously was there. Obviously, they had mega evolutions and stuff like that. I had a pretty good idea based upon seeing Let's Play of the first hour or two from Video Games Awesome of at least what I could deal with and what I would have to deal with for the first hour of the game. However, unlike Pokemon Alpha Sapphire and Pokemon Omega Ruby, where I had access to a bunch of decent Pokemon through the gift feature, I didn't have access to that anymore. Unfortunately, because I chose to wait to play Pokemon X, I regretfully did not have access to any of the Pokemon gifts that were available. I couldn't download I didn't download a Torchic, for example. There was a bunch of Pokemon given away the gift, including, I think, a Diancie, which I was not able to have access to because the Diancie codes had long since expired that I had. So I couldn't, and so I couldn't just, play, or access the gift system. That had all been, most of the gifts at that point had been shifted to Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. This was before they started giving away the legendaries. So I'll get into the legendaries later. So I was basically on my own. But I had a game under my belt, and I had at least some experience about what to do at this point. I was ready for it. Now, if I can talk about the Pokemon X by itself, there were a lot of features in Pokemon X that did not cross over, did not get brought over to the third generation remakes because they weren't in third generation. And I was really happy to see this. I really, really, really like the environment and the art style. That I cannot stress enough. As somebody who visited the country of France, this was a long time ago, the last time I was there. But, and I really want to go back, actually. The country is beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. I really liked seeing how the Pokemon Company replicated the country. And it was just awesome. I really liked the art style and the graphics, and just that was a great job. I also really appreciated the fact that they allowed avatar customization and clothing customization. This is something I think people have been wanting for quite a while, especially since it's like an extension of who you are. You are the Pokemon trainer. And this is something that they've been pushing ever since, Generation 2. You are the Pokemon trainer. The Pokemon trainer is not some character in a game who has a history. That's for the animated series. You are the Pokemon trainer, and you're the new guy trying to be the best like no one ever was. And once Crystal came, and I remember when Crystal came out where you could finally play as a girl, canonically, or choose to play as a female trainer, that was a big deal. And the ability to now, in this game, not only could you choose your gender, but you could choose your clothing and your appearance, your hairstyle, your skin tone, your eye color, all of that stuff could be changed now, just brought in a closer link to the game itself. So I felt like I was the Pokemon trainer, in this game more than any other Pokemon game I've played. The fact that I could mess with my avatar like that and change their clothing, just a great way to go. I like the rollerblades. You get a set of rollerblades after I think the first town or the first gym in the game. I can't remember exactly when you get it, but around that time. And it's controlled with and if you use the D-pad, then you instantaneously go to it. No having to hold down, the B button for running. No need for running shoes. I think you even got like running shoes automatically in the game, so you could do that at the very least. But I know that Nintendo had been talking about. I mean, obviously in the first generation game, you had access to a bicycle if you wanted to travel faster. And trust me, in the first game, because there was no B button run, you would be using that bike quite a bit. It was just so much more convenient than to have to go into a menu, pull up something, or attach something to a frequent used items list, registering it, however you want to call it, to simply move your finger from the D-pad to the analog stick, and just you automatically being able to use that. I thought, if anything, it reminded me that this was kind of overdue. I remember that when I was seeing previews for Generation 2, in some cases while Generation 2 was still in beta testing, there was experimentation with possibly allowing you to use a skateboard. I think Gold was going to be originally having a skateboard in some of the original concept art. I don't know if they were going to forego the bike or not, but if, from far as I can tell, from reviews I've seen of Generation 2, there is no skateboard in Generation 2. You still, you have to use a bike. But for Generation 6, it's so much more convenient to, hop on rollerblades. And it allowed, obviously, for things like tricks. So, obviously, you can probably tell from now, I liked Generation 6. I liked playing Pokemon X a lot. And I know that a lot of people don't like Pokemon Generation 6 as much. I'm going to try my best to defend why I like Generation 6 as much as I do. But immediately, just from what I've talked about so far, movement, controls, I liked them. Gameplay with the XP share, Mega Evolution coming back, obviously, this new features for this generation, I liked them. The art style, the fact that they chose to replicate France for the environment, I like that too. Where I think that some people probably had the problem that it was such a simple story. But I like this story. I thought that the game's presentation, which while was better in the Generation 3 remakes, I thought they were able to do a lot for this game, that wowed me even on a presentation standpoint. Like, the fact that when the game opened, you're waking up and you're in your pajamas in your room, and you change your clothes and everything, and that the way that they started that up, I thought that was a great way to open up the game, and it grabbed me and it held on to me, and I was able to get through the game. It wasn't as easy to get through as the Generation 3 remakes were. I was having obviously some points where I was getting stuck. But I was able to power on throughout the entire game. Obviously, I think that there were a couple of things that the game could not do that other games did. I really liked the interactions you had with your peers, the friends that you get throughout the game. I really liked the professor. I really liked the Pokemon professor. I really liked that they brought back the Generation 1 starters, so that you could actually choose a Generation 1 starter once you met that game's Pokemon Professor. I thought that was great. A great way to move on. Mega Evolutions, obviously, still like them. Like I said, it wasn't as easy as a game as the Generation 3 remakes were, probably because I wasn't getting as many of the free stuff as I was for Generation 3 remakes. But once I had that Charizard, it was all over. Me and the Charizard, I was able to get through this game. I picked a Froakie as my starter for for Gen 6, and it was with me the whole time. But darn it, once I got that Charizard, I was using flamethrower. Once I got my I was mega evolving it too. So I have a soft spot for that game. There were a couple of moments which I kind of want to talk about later on, but I think that, like I said, it was harder for me to get through the Elite Four and the Pokemon League Champion. I think it took me at least 2 or 3 attempts to get through, whereas I was able to get through on my first attempt in Gen 3. I was able to eventually get through it, and finally I had another Pokemon game under my belt. And as soon as unfortunately, there is not really as heavy an end game for for Pokemon X as there was for, there was no Delta episode-ish thing. But I like the fact that since they were trying to do so many nods to Generation 1, obviously they allowed you to use the Kanto starters. I did like that it ended with the ability to capture Mewtwo. I liked that they brought back Mewtwo. And so the last thing that I ended up doing in that game was capturing a Mewtwo, and I was so happy when I caught it. I didn't even use a Master Ball to do it. I used a couple of Ultra Balls, and I was able to actually capture a Mewtwo legitimately. I was so happy about that, because at that point I had never captured a Mewtwo before, if you remember. So with Generation 6 under my belt, what did I choose to do next? Well, I had 2 or 3 options. I could have played Generation 4, although I had some problems getting started with Generation 4. But what I really wanted to do was play Generation 5. I had Black 2, and White 2, and I really wanted to play the black version. And so I decided that after defeating Generation 6, I was going to go back and finally play Generation 5. And my 3DS had no problem playing a DS game. Now, some people would probably argue, well, how difficult was it to go from a fully 3DS title that had such good speed and movement and everything else to a fifth generation game which was 2D and 3D, but mostly 2D. It did not move as fast. It did not have a lot of the features that they brought in for Generation 6. There was no character customization. There was no XP share. Well, there was, but it wasn't like the XP share was there. And it took some getting used to, but it wasn't that difficult. And I'll tell you why it wasn't that difficult. While I was playing Generation 5 after having played Generation 6, I didn't really consider it going backwards because having played, originally Generation 1 and failing at it, I was prepared for a difficult trek. I had mentally prepared myself. I felt like I had learned enough about things like typing and things like, movements and PowerPoints and stuff like that, that with the 2 games under my belt, I was actually ready to tackle a tougher game. And I knew that Generation 5 was going to be harder to complete, especially since it didn't have a lot of the stuff that they brought in for Generation 6. If you, caught a Pokemon with a Pokeball, you wouldn't get the XP for it. There was no XP share that you could share throughout any of the Pokemon that wasn't used. And even though there is an XP share, you don't get in Generation 5, you don't get it until much later in the game, and it only works for one Pokemon. So, and there was no Mega Evolution, obviously. So but I was prepared. And let me tell you something, I was not even in the slightest upset or angered while playing Generation 5 for one very good reason. And I think I know what this is. I think, in my opinion, this is, why people have the issues that they do with Generation 6. I think Generation 5 has the best overall story in any Pokemon game that I've played. And I've played Generation 1, I've played Generation 3's remakes, I played Generation 6, I played both games in Generation 5. I have not played 2 or 4, but I think, and this is my opinion, that the Generation 5 story is the finest story in any Pokemon game that I've played. And that's just a testament to, the writing, the characters that they chose to use. I mean, I really have a soft spot in my heart for Bianca. And I really like the character designs a lot for, obviously not just for the peers, for the protagonist, but also for the antagonist. I really liked En's design. I really liked En's motivation. And say what you will about Generation 5. I'm sure everybody has their own theory. It is clear to me that Generation 5 is truly En's story. It's not even your story. Because you as a character are basically imparting on your own Pokemon character. But it's your actions that's what drives En's actions. And En's actions are really what moves the story. And I think that sitting down and just watching the events unfold as N slowly changes is just amazing to me. And Generation 5 was tough. There was a learning curve there for me. Because it was tough for me to be able to catch Pokemon. It was, of varying types, especially since I had no gifts access, actually. By this point, Nintendo's Wi-Fi connection was shut down, so the games weren't playable online. The only way you could trade was locally, and none of my friends had, local copies that were still playing. I think I have a cousin that has a copy of one of the games, but he wasn't playing, so I didn't have a chance to talk to him about it at the same time. So I finally, got through it. And like I said, for a game that was, had its graphics which were based on 2D perspective, it was just amazing to see so much. I think I know why that everybody talks about why Generation 5 is so fondly remembered. People have been talking about Generation 5 for years. They're still talking about Generation 5. And I think it's just because it has such a great story. I really liked the environment of, I think it's Unova. I'm pretty certain it's Unova. Don't pelt me with comments if I got it wrong, but I'm pretty certain Generation 5 is in the Unova region. And that's, I think, based on New York City. I don't know. I just really, really liked it. It was, to me, just an amazing game. And I was like, as soon as I made it through that game, I said, I have to continue. I have to play version 2. I have to go straight from Black to Black 2. I had a copy of Black 2. I said I have to crack that open and I have to continue on. Because I'm curious, since this is a sequel, how does the sequel interact with the original? Now, I told you that story to tell you this story. I did have, at least at one point, there is a couple of companion programs for Pokemon, the Pokemon version 2 for 5th generation. There were 2 apps released along the same time for the 3DS as downloadable titles. One was the Pokédex 3D Pro, and another was Pokemon Dream Radar, which was designed to interact directly with the Pokemon Black 2 and Pokemon White 2. Now, Pokemon Dream Radar, there's a review of it on my website. I had downloaded, I had played it a little bit, but because because the game says, well, you have to offload anything you capture in this program to a full retail title. And since I wasn't willing to crack open my retail title and start playing it, I decided to just hold off on really playing Dream Radar. But now, once I had Black 2, I was ready to start playing it. Once I had that game opened and I started playing it, I also started at the same time playing Pokemon Dream Radar, actually. And so I was playing both Pokemon Black 2 and Pokemon Dream Radar at the same time. And let me tell you something, that's really the way to play Pokemon Black version 2, or any of those games. You really need to get that Dream Radar. If you have a 3DS, if you have any of this, version 2 of the 5th generation games, I think that it's like $3 to download in US currency. Get it. Because you can capture some Pokemon that you can capture a pretty good variety of Pokemon, as well as a couple of legendary Pokemon, using that application. It's a simple AR game, obviously, where you're basically just firing lasers at globes as you're moving around. You look kind of silly, doing it. I remember my girlfriend and my girlfriend's mother thought it was pretty silly when I was, doing it. Well, if you really want to hear my thoughts more in depth about this, go to my website, GamingSess.net, and read my review of it. It's in the review section of the of the website. I really don't want to go into it too much, but let me tell you something. I caught a Slowpoke in that Dream Radar. Once I had that transferred, I think I transferred it to my game just before I tackled the first gym. That Pokemon stayed on my roster for the entire length of the duration of me playing that game. It leveled up with me. I was so grateful for it to get it in my game, because that Slowpoke was so useful to me throughout that entire game. It leveled up with me. It was great. It helped me defeat the first gym leader. I used it when I was battling the Elite Four. I was so grateful. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The version 2 games start off in a separate, expanded, portion of the Unova region where you don't originally start off in the original games. So immediately, it was obvious that they were going to retread a lot of the original Generation 5 games area, location. But the fact that they chose to first expand the timeline by, I think, 2 years, and also add in new areas, including an area starting off with, which was entirely new, with a couple of new gyms and a lot of new options, was the good way to go. I mean, I come from the PC. I remember expansion packs And if I remember correctly, Pokemon, the version 2 games were never more than $35 MSRP. Usually a new Pokemon game is $40 MSRP. So immediately that $5 off, it kind of made me feel like a bit of a pseudo sequel / expansion pack, but I don't think I paid more than $15 for the game, so it was totally worth the money. That plus I had the Dream Radar. It was, I was psyched for it. And it was easier for me, I think, to get through Pokemon version 2 than it was for me to get through, the original Generation 5 because the Dream Radar was there to help me. That's not to say it wasn't difficult for me to get through the Elite Four. It was difficult. It was very difficult for me to get through the Elite Four, but not for the same reason you think. In this case, I remembered being so anxious when I was first playing Pokemon, the original Pokemon Black, because I was like, just like with the previous Pokemon games, I wasn't going to save during the Elite Four battle. And then I tackled the Elite Four, and I was so nervous because I didn't know, what was going up for the Pokemon League Champion. And it turns out that you don't battle the Pokemon Elite Champion or the Pokemon World Champion during the storyline of at least not during that portion. It goes from the Elite Four to, I guess I could just spoil this to you, fast forward like 30 seconds if you don't want to hear the spoiler, to the big showdown with N. Okay, spoilers over. You can battle the Pokemon League Champion in Generation 5, obviously, but I don't think I ever did. I think I moved on. I can't remember if I did or not. But I'm backtracking a bit too much. I'll get back to what I was saying. For Generation 2, for Pokemon Generation 5's version 2, I did like that the characters were back. I mean, Bianca coming back was great, seeing everybody back. But what really impressed me most of all was seeing who was the Pokemon League champion in version 2, Generation 5. I could not believe it when I saw it. Now, when I was playing Black version 2, I was ready for the Elite Four. I figured it was going to be very similar to the Elite Four battle from Pokemon Black. And I was right. I had characters that could go up against the right types. But I was completely unprepared for any battle with the Pokemon League Championship. Because as you remember, I didn't battle the Pokemon League Champion in Pokemon Black. So I just assumed I was going to have a powerful team and I was going to be ready for whoever if I had to run up against a champion, I was ready for whoever it was going to be. So I defeated the Elite Four in one go, and I moved on to the Pokemon League Champion, and I was shocked to see who it was. I was shocked and impressed and pleased to see who it was. And this champion's first Pokemon completely wiped out my entire team. And as you remember, I don't save during a Pokemon Elite Four battle because I was always worried. Yeah, I was unprepared. And so I thought to myself, having seen who this champion was and who they had up for the first Pokemon, I was going through my entire Pokédex, every box I had to see if I had anything that was high enough level that I could use. And I had a fighting type that I had caught just before I battled the Elite Four. Wasn't very super high level, but I figured if I gave that fighting type the XP share and went through the entire Elite Four again and leveled up the character with the Elite, from points from the Elite Four, experience points in Elite Four, maybe this particular fighting type Pokemon would be a high enough level to at least be able to be remotely useful against the champion's first wave of Pokemon, first Pokemon that they throw out. And so I loaded up a team. My Slowbro was on it. I think it was, my Slowpoke was now at least a Slowbro by this point, so he was on the team. Bunch of others. My starter was on the team, which was a fire type, which was fully leveled up and fully evolved. And I had in my hands a team, And trust me, some people will go through a game and they'll say, well, I have a team of 6. I didn't use this 1 or 2 Pokemon that much. For this battle that I went through on this Elite Four championship, I used everyone in that team equally. Everyone had a moment to shine. And that battle through the Elite Four, and finally when I made it to the Pokemon Champion, that fighting type was a high enough level that I was able to defeat them. And I was so pleased with myself that I was so happy that it took 2 attempts. Elite Four was easier this time because I was ready for them, but that champion was dynamite, especially with they were dragon types. Oh my god. I don't want to spoil who it was, but I was so ready for it at that point, and I was so happy that my fighting type was able to help me. So what I remember most about Pokemon Black version 2 when I played it was that my team was completely on my side. The entire team was with me. And I guess that's just a testament to maybe the fact that I'm getting to be a better player. Now, as I'm sure you guys know, and I kind of been skating around this for most of the night, obviously Nintendo did mention the fact that, well, obviously the Pokemon Generation 1 games are available now for the Nintendo 3DS. And I remember when they finally made the announcement that they were going to make, Gen 1 3DS, downloadable for the 3DS, thinking that this was the greatest announcement Nintendo could have ever made. Better than the Earthbound. I know, that's going to be controversial. I'm probably going to get downvoted right now. I had been asking Nintendo for years in those Club Nintendo forums, re-release Generation 1 on 3DS. Please re-release Generation 1. And Nintendo, I think it was back in November, if I remember correctly, during a Nintendo Direct, when they're making all these announcements about their upcoming calendar year, they said, we will have Generation 1 re-released on the 3DS in February 22nd, 2016. I think that was the day they did it. And I thought, why wait 4 months to do it? But damn it, you've got my money. And I found out that day coincided with the 20th anniversary of the release of Pokemon. And not only did Nintendo have that planned for that particular day, but they had a whole set of stuff planned for that day. So my girlfriend and I decide we're gonna check out all this cool stuff that's coming out. And at midnight on that day, I immediately downloaded Pokemon Yellow. And I said, now I finally have the chance to really give this game the playthrough it deserves. And I could not have been more excited for it. So yeah, I finally had my own copy of Pokemon Yellow that it was mine. I could finally play it as much as I wanted to. And right after I downloaded that game, I started playing it immediately. I didn't really want to spend too much time playing it just yet, but I definitely did want to play it quite a bit to see if it was exactly as I remembered. And it was. The game's graphics, they used the color palette for Pokemon Yellow, at least the Virtual Console version, used the same color palette that I remembered. And which was ironic because the other two games did not have a color palette. Neither Pokemon Blue nor Pokemon Red seemed to have, at least I noticed the virtual, in any of the screenshots or video footage that I saw, both of those games seemed to be in monochrome. But Pokemon Yellow was in color, so that was another reason why I chose that particular version. Plus, I wanted my Pikachu as a starter. There was a lot of stuff added in Yellow that I really wanted to make use of. So I started playing the game, and I can't remember how far I decided to play until I decided to go to sleep, but I remember catching the Pikachu and probably made it as far as Brock's Gym. Don't quote me on that, but I think at least my initial start, I was trying to make it to either Viridian City or Brock's Gym or something like that. I can't remember. But that was just the start of Pokemon Day 2016, the 20th anniversary day. GameStop was having an event where they were giving away posters, and Toys R Us was having an event where they were giving away posters and promo trading cards, which were really cool. And I wanted to check out definitely both of those. So my girlfriend and I went to GameStop, and then we later went to Toys R Us. We got a whole bunch of cool goodies. I ended up picking up one of those Mew figurines in not a Master Ball. I can't even remember what ball it came in, but yeah, I picked up one of those Mew figurines, and I was very happy with that. And we were just amazed by all the cool stuff. Particularly out of all the stuff that was going on that day, the event that seemed the most fun was probably the Toys R Us event. The Toys R Us event, maybe this had to do with the management that they had at the particular Toys R Us where we decided to check out, but the manager was a really nice guy. Just a really nice guy. I'll follow up with this a bit later because there was another Pokemon event which I'll talk about in just a bit, but just a nice guy. Mostly it was, kids. The kids were coming in so that they could play and have a little bit of a tournament. I don't play the Pokemon trading card game. I never learned the rules basically, and so I can't really comment about it. But and I didn't want to participate in the tournament. But it was really cool that the kids had a venue close to home where they could actually play the trading card and get, they were giving away promotional cards. And let me tell you something, the poster that Toys R Us gave away was awesome. They gave away a really freaking very good poster that on Pokemon Day. I think it's the same poster that Nintendo New York was giving away, but it was an awesome poster. So props to Toys R Us for that. Now, I kind of wanted. There was also some other stuff that was going on. Twitch did a full day stream with hosted by the J-Wits and a bunch of other people. So and they just took over Twitch for the day. It was awesome to watch. They were playing a whole bunch of classic games, including Pokemon Stadium, which really does need to be added to the Wii U Virtual Console now. Now that Gen 1 is available, they really need to add Pokemon Stadium as a downloadable title. So they played Pokemon Snap. They played it was fun. It was fun. But what was really awesome about it was that even the trading card game was getting into. Anybody who logged into the online trading card game you were getting free goodies. So that was cool. And they ended the day with a video marathon of the Pokemon animated movies. It started with Pokemon the first movie, went into Pokemon 2000. I stopped watching after the third movie because, of course, I already had the 4th, 5th, and 7th movies already available and on Blu-ray. And so, but it was nice to see the first 3 movies. I had never seen Pokemon 3 before, and I don't think I'd ever seen Pokemon 2000 all the way through either. So it was good to watch those. Other stuff that I thought was really awesome, just off the top of my head, they ended it with Pokemon Origins, the Pokemon Origins anime. So good choice on that. A lot of people wanted them to rebroadcast those animated features. Overall, it was an awesome day. But what kept it so exciting was that I could finally continue playing Generation 1. As I've been saying through this podcast, part of the reason why I didn't want to play any of the later generation games was because I really wanted the opportunity to finally go back and play Generation 1, Generation 2, Generation 3, basically in order. And while I did have what I feel to be the Generation 3 remake counts as Generation 3, at least for the short term, I didn't have any way of playing Generation 1 until they re-released it. So I was so happy about that. It took quite a while for me to actually be able to beat this game. Not because it was super difficult. I mean, obviously walkthroughs are available and most of that game has been mapped out. But I didn't want to glitch, and I really didn't want to look up FAQs or anything like this. I basically wanted to play and beat Pokemon Generation 1 to the best of my ability with not really much help. And granted, a lot of it was me trying to remember where things are and where things are located, because I had played most of it before, obviously. I mentioned that earlier in the podcast. But I really wanted to, one of the rules I told myself going into this was going to be that my goal was I was going to beat my previous I was going to beat my previous settings. I was going to do better than I did the first time I tried to play it. That was my goal. And there was a lot of stuff that I missed, either intentionally or unintentionally, in the first time I played, that I just was not going to miss this time. One was I was definitely going to be trying to capture a Snorlax. Another was that I was definitely going to be trying to capture Zapdos, Moltres, and Ultracuno. And the final one was I was going to beat the Pokemon League champion. And that game by itself was easily, I don't know, last time I checked, I was at about 30 hours of gameplay. But, I mean, right now, at least off the top of my head, I was easily 15 to 20 hours in before I even made it to the Elite Four. But I knew for a fact that what I really wanted to do was capture as many legendaries as I possibly could. I figured if I had the legendary birds on my side, that might make me a little bit easier. It might make the Elite Four a little bit easier. So, with my Pikachu on my side, I got myself a Charmander, which I evolved to a Charizard. I'm sorry, to a Charmeleon. I don't think I ever was able to evolve into a Charizard. They weren't I don't know, the IVs or whatever it was. At least on the Blastoise, Charmander, the Bulbasaur were not very good. And I'm sorry, the Squirtle. It took a lot of leveling just to make those guys useful, basically. And I did have to TM, and I did have to TM them and use HMs on them, basically, in some cases, to teach them useful, powerful moves early, so I could make them more useful. Because when you got them, they were all level 10, and by that point, you were going up against level 20, at least level 15, level 20 guys. So it took a lot of grinding to make those guys useful, but eventually, it did happen. So, I cannot tell you how much fun it was to finally get back to these games. Even though I had played through the more recent Pokemon titles, going back to Generation 1, it was obvious there was a lot of stuff that was missing. There was no B-button run. You had to go into the statistics to check your level statistics. They didn't add a progress bar for XP leveling until Generation 2 at least. There was obviously the glitch where you could, if you were using a Psychic type, there was no super effective move against a Psychic type Pokemon, and if a Psychic, and a whole line about using Ghost type against Psychic types in the anime did not work. In fact, if anything, Psychic types were super effective against Ghosts in Generation 1. So there was a lot riding on this. It was a difficult game, even though I had like four Pokemon games under my belt. I truly had to respect this game, and I knew, based upon when it was made, this RPG could have easily kicked my ass. But I stayed on it. I grinded. I paid my dues. I learned typing. I was doing the best I could, and I slowly and surely was progressing myself through the game. I did have a couple of problems when I hit the Psychic Gym. Sabrina was difficult, but not impossible. By that point, I had caught a Drowsy. And most people use catch themselves an Abra, and then they upgrade it to a Cadet, or they level it up to a Kadabra. I caught myself a Drowsy, and I evolved that. And that seemed to have worked pretty well for me, at least on the Psychic type side. So, moving on, I used that to basically defeat the Alakazam, and it worked. It worked in my favor. I also, took the time to try to capture as much of the Pokemon as I could. When I finally made it to a Snorlax, I captured it. And let me tell you something. In Generation 1, here's my tip. No matter how low you make that Generation 1 Snorlax in his HP pool, he is gonna constantly be able to dodge those Pokeballs until he puts himself to sleep. My advice would be, wait for him to put himself to sleep to heal himself. Hit him once, and then use a Pokeball on him there. You might have a better job doing it that way. As time progressed, it became, it was starting to get easier for me to be able to play this. I was getting more used to the level typing and things like that. I was grinding pretty well. And my Drowsy was very useful on my team, as well as my Pikachu. Also, I had leveled up my Squirtle to a Wartortle, which was also making it very useful, especially once I had a chance to teach it Surf. So my Water type guy was very useful on my side. That's not to say it wasn't difficult early on for me to play. I did have problems with Brock, and I did have problems with Misty. Even though I had the Pikachu on my side, it wasn't superly difficult, but it was certainly a challenge. It wasn't until at least I hit the third gym when I really started hitting a stride about what I needed to do. And so it became easier and easier, especially once I had the Psychic type and I was being thrown a lot of Fighting type to level up and stuff like that. So I was still enjoying it, even though the game was simple, even though a lot of the features that were brought in later were not there. I was still enjoying myself playing Pokemon Yellow. Finally, I captured an Articuno, which is exactly what I did in the first time I played it, so I was very happy to capture an Articuno finally. It took a lot of Pokeballs to capture it, but it was doable. And then I decided after I captured Articuno and defeated the 8th and final gym that I was going to go to Victory Road. I was going to at least attempt Victory Road. So I headed for Victory Road, and immediately I started getting humbled by what was on Victory Road. And I decided to use Victory Road as a bit of a grind, basically. So I kept grinding, and I kept grinding, and I kept grinding. And eventually Victory Road started becoming easier and easier for me to play, especially since there's so many Zubats in Victory Road. At least I was getting spawned a lot of Zubats. Perfect Pokemon to use against a Zubat is Pikachu. So Pikachu was getting plenty of my Pikachu was getting plenty of leveling, as well as my Drowsy. So things were going pretty well. Eventually, I got to Moltres, and I was never able to capture Moltres the first time I played that game. And so I tried battling Moltres, and I just couldn't do it. I couldn't capture him. Every time I throw a Pokeball at him, even high-level Pokeballs, Ultra Balls, no matter how many Ultra Balls I threw at this thing, no matter how low I was able to get this thing's HP down, it still would block every... I would still miss. I would still miss with every freaking Pokeball I would throw at it. And it was so irritating. Eventually, I decided, you know what, I'll just come back to it later. But I decided not to tackle the Elite Four just yet. What I probably should have done was I probably should have tried to capture a Zapdos, but I didn't know where the Zapdos was. I couldn't find where the darn power plant was. There's only it's a very specific spot as to where it takes. It requires Surf to get over there, but I couldn't remember. And looking at the map, it wasn't very easy to navigate where the heck the Zapdos power plant was. So I kept going. You know, I kept putting it off. And so I decided finally I was going to just buy as many Ultra Balls as I could afford, or I could basically fit in my backpack. And I was going to try again. I was going to try to capture a Moltres. And I went back to Victory Road. I went back to Moltres armed with a bunch of Ultra Balls, like a lot of Ultra Balls. And I decided to try once more. And somehow, through some type of luck or numbers or whatever, I was able to get this Moltres down to like 2 hit points. And at that point, I dared not attack it again. And so I decided I'm just going to keep throwing Pokeballs at it until I run out of Pokeballs. Because at this point, there's no way that I can hit it again without making it faint. And this is it. This is going to be my opportunity. I must have thrown at least somewhere between 6 and 10 Ultra Balls at this thing. But eventually, one connected. And I caught Moltres. Now, I had been playing the game off and on for at least a week by this point. And I had held off, playing Victory Road because there was only so much time that I had in a day to basically be able to play this. And, constantly getting my ass kicked by Moltres was not something that was making me want to continue to play it, but I stayed at it. But let me tell you something. Once I caught that Moltres, it was like I had a second wind. I'm like, I've got Moltres. I can do this. I can beat Victory Road. I can finally go for the Pokemon League, the Pokemon League. And right after I caught that Moltres, I went straight for the Pokemon League, and I registered my Pokemon for the Pokemon League, saved my game, and I knew going into this I was going to need to be very smart about which Pokemon I chose to take with me to battle the Elite Four. I finally decided to take my Drowsy, which I think by this point had evolved to a Hypno. I did not have a Kadabra or an Abra on me, so I decided to just use my Hypno. I had my Pikachu. I had my Blastoise, which, my Wartortle evolved to a Blastoise, so I brought that with me. I think I brought my Venusaur. By that point, I had been leveling up a Bulbasaur. It wasn't very useful, super useful to me. I wasn't able to teach it any attacks that were basically making it useful, but I think eventually I was able to level it up to a Venusaur. I taught it Solar Beam with a TM, and so it was becoming useful from use of Solar Beam. But other than that, I wasn't really using it that much at that point. I had my Articuno on me, and I had the Moltres on me. I decided, since I was having so much trouble leveling up my Charmeleon, to simply just let it sit in the PC box for right now while I used the Moltres as my fire type. I did teach both Articuno and Moltres Fly just to be on the safe side. They only knew 2 moves when I caught them. And so I decided to teach them Fly at the very least, because Fly is a very useful move to use. So with an Articuno, a Hypno, a Pikachu, a Venusaur, and a Moltres, I decided to go for Victory Road. I figured if I do beat this, I'll go for Zapdos afterwards. I already had an electric type that was pretty powerful. I didn't need to bring Zapdos into it just yet. No reason to catch it just yet. So I went for the Elite Four, and the first type that you go up against is the Ice type. And I was trying to remember, I'll just use my Fire type against the Ice type, because that's usually what I would use in like Generation 6. And I figured Fire type works against Ice type pretty well. At least that was how my Charizard was always able to beat Ice type Pokemon in Gen 6. Turns out, no, it's the exact opposite in Gen 1. So I was trying to figure out, it's like I didn't remember, just use your Pikachu. I couldn't remember that, because most of them were also water types. Most of the Ice types were also water types in the Elite Force, Gen 1. So eventually, I think that was the most difficult time I had, actually, was trying to figure out what best to use against the Ice types. Because again, I was still going on Generation 5, Generation 6 rules. Eventually, I did use my Pikachu against the Ice type trainer in the Elite Four, and they just went down like a house of cards. And so I decided, okay, let's just keep going. And I brought out my Psychic type, and I was like, I'm not going to save here. I either make it all the way through with all 5 of these trainers that I'm going to go up against, or I'm not. I'm going to fail here, and I have to reset. And the first trainer, once I figured out the electric type to use against the Ice types, I didn't have a problem with another gym member. Every single gym member, every single Elite Four member that I went up against, I had something that I could use against them. And I don't know what it was. Maybe it was the fact that I had followed my rules and I had stocked my Pokemon. I had trained my Pokemon with only attacks. No buffs, no debuffs. Attacks only. So that I could use them, or I wouldn't have to have that risk of running out of attacks while I was in the Elite Four battle. And eventually I brought down the 4th member of the Elite Four, and I got notified, look, we've got one more guy. We have a league champion. You're going to have to beat him if you're going to want to be the new league champion. And I don't want to spoil a 20-year-old game, so I won't say who the league champion is. I'm sure you can remember who it was. Smell you later. It was him. And I went up against him. And I remembered going up against him the first time and remembering running out of power points while battling him. But this time I was ready. I had enough Pokemon with enough power points left that I thought I could go up against his group. And he was using the same Pokemon that I had remembered, or at least the majority of the same Pokemon that I had remembered. So I remembered what Pokemon to best use against his Pokemon from previous times I had battled him. And I just continued to use that to my advantage, and he eventually went down. And I was so words cannot express. I've beaten games in the past, but never have I. It's been a long time since I felt such an important sense of accomplishment defeating a game. I guess when I defeated the other Pokemon games, like when I defeated Gen 3 for the first time, the Gen 3 remake for the first time, I felt a sense of accomplishment. I felt a sense of pride that I was able to have done, beaten my very first Pokemon game. But I felt that with me when I finally beat Generation 1, a game that I had been putting off defeating for 15 years at least. I had finally defeated it the way I wanted to defeat it on the Nintendo 3DS, and I was so happy. But I knew at that point the game wasn't over. Even though I had defeated the champion, there were still 2 legendaries for me to capture. I still had to capture a Zapdos, and I still had to capture Mewtwo. And I held on to that Master Ball. I remembered, you keep that Master Ball on you, and you don't use that Master Ball until you get to Mewtwo. And so, I can't remember what I went for first. I can't remember if I went for the Zapdos first or if I went for the Mewtwo first. But let me just say, I did finally have to look up where to go in order to find where the power plant was. I'll admit that one. But I figured by that point the game was over. I had beaten the game, so it wasn't a big deal. It wasn't. I wasn't going to glitch, but I wasn't afraid of simply looking up information about where that power plant, because I couldn't find it. So I found the power plant, I made it to the power plant, I went into the power plant, and I caught a Zapdos. I know that sounds kind of anticlimactic, but it really wasn't that difficult to capture in comparison to Articuno or Moltres. Maybe it was because I was leveled up so high, but I think maybe 2 attempts to capture Zapdos. It was not that difficult for me. So I was happy about that. Next up was Mewtwo. That one, and at that point I was like, I know how high level this dungeon is. I am just going to run from everything. I'm like, I have the legendary birds. I have all 3 of the legendary birds on my side. I have a pretty powerful psychic type. I have I still have my Blastoise on me. But I don't really know if I'll be able to use anything very useful in this final dungeon. So I was just going to run from everything. And I did. I went through the dungeon, basically running from most of the enemies I was basically running from. Until finally I made it to the end of the dungeon, which in the American version is actually pretty linear. In the Japanese version it's a maze, but they made it pretty linear, and I appreciated it actually. It was much easier to get through the dungeon knowing how linear it was. And I made it to Mewtwo, and I readied the Master Ball. And a level 70 Mewtwo is basically, as far as I'm concerned, the final boss of the game. And I readied my Master Ball, and I fired my Master Ball at him, and I caught him in one shot. Exactly as I predicted, exactly as I wanted. And I had my legendary, I had my Mewtwo. And I went out of the dungeon, and I was so happy. I'm like, I beat this game the way I wanted to. I'm so excited about it. I'm so happy about it. This could not have gone better. And all that in one day. Moltres, Elite Four, League Champion, Zapdos, Mewtwo. All in one Saturday afternoon. Could not have been more excited about it. That's kind of the story that I wanted to kind of wrap this podcast up. I know this podcast is probably, at this point, we're going on probably the longest podcast that I've ever recorded. There have been some long podcasts that I've recorded, but I think probably this is going to be my longest when it's all said and done. I want to thank you guys for watching it, but I think I have 1 or 2 more stories that I really want to tell, but they're quick stories, actually. Throughout the rest of the year, after Pokemon Day, February 22nd, if I remember correctly, it was February 22nd. There were retailers that were deciding to do their own versions of Pokemon Days. Target did a Pokemon Day the day after the release of Pokken Tournament. Pokken Tournament was a game that I was really looking forward to. My girlfriend is a very big fan of fighting games. She loved Soul Calibur titles. I got her into Killer Instinct, and she really liked Killer Instinct, so there's no question of, she really likes Killer Instinct now. But, so she likes that. She likes Mortal Kombat, obviously. She was a big fan of Mortal Kombat 9. And so I really wanted to get her into Pokken Tournament. And so I picked that up for the Wii U the day, basically on Pokemon Day for Target. Target gave away these Pikachu sun visors, and exclusive shiny Magikarp card, which was everybody was really jealous about that card. Everybody really liked that card. But there was one other Pokemon Day that was done, if I remember correctly, April 2nd. April 2nd, Toys R Us decided to do another Pokemon Day. And I went to the same Toys R Us I went to for the first Pokemon Day. And I got to talk to some... that was really fun, too. I think I went alone. My girlfriend didn't go with me for either the second Toys R Us Pokemon Day or the Target Pokemon Day. She was busy those days. So I went by myself. But I really, really, really liked getting a chance to, because I very rarely in real life get a chance to have conversations about this stuff. Online, yeah, it's easier to have these kind of conversations about games. But especially here where I live, there's gamers now. There didn't used to be gamers, but gamers are here now. And it was really nice that Toys R Us, out of all the things I want to say about Toys R Us especially, having these events and hiring the right people to manage these events. Because, again, that manager that I mentioned earlier was back to do this event. Made it really feel like that there was a community that lived close to me that was into this stuff. And that, out of anything, giving this community a chance to get together in a venue and communicate with our love of this medium, of this franchise, was probably the best thing ever. And I got to give props to everybody that's been hosting these events, especially Toys R Us, who were doing these events, with tournaments and stuff like that. So it was a reason to stay around, basically, and converse with other fans. They had two other Pokemon Prime promo cards that they were giving away on that day, and they were giving away another guidebook. So there was no poster this time around, but the promo codes were worth it. So I stood around and I was talking to some of the other people that had also stayed around. By this point, I had beat Generation 1, and we could finally have a conversation about what was our favorite generation, what was our favorite Pokemon. That's worth. It was really fun to hang around. Then they were my age. These guys were my age, so Pokemon knows no age. There is anybody of any age can pick up and play these games, and that's another testament to it. Now, I usually wrap up these podcasts with a conversation about where do I think that the Pokemon games are going, or where do I think that the franchise as a whole is going to end up. And that's actually going to probably be the very easiest that I'm ever going to answer, because I know where the franchise is going. Nintendo has made their plans perfectly clear. There are going to be two major releases that are going to be coming out. One is going to be obviously Pokemon Go, which we don't really know that much about, unfortunately. We know it's going to be a smartphone game. We know it's going to be an augmented reality game. We know that there's going to be Pokemon Go, accessories and stuff like that you can use in conjunction with your smartphone. But other than that, we haven't really seen any gameplay, and any information about beta or anything like that is just not, there hasn't been a beta release yet, actually. So I can't really comment on that. Even when Nintendo was hosting the Pokemon Day events on Twitch, all they could basically say about Pokemon Go is coming. They didn't really do a preview of it, unfortunately. They did a preview for Pokken Tournament, which was nice, but there was no further Pokemon Go information. However, if you're a Nintendo loyalist with a Nintendo 3DS of your own, there's one other thing that will be coming. The next major Pokemon games, I'm going to call them 7th generation. I'm like 100% certain these are 7th generation games, Pokemon Sun and Pokemon Moon. These will be the next generation Pokemon games. I know that a lot of people are hoping for a Pokemon Z, and maybe that might still be coming out, but the next major release is going to be that. Unfortunately, we don't really know that much about these games either. Some of the promo stuff for them have kind of shown, we can see what some of the environments are going to look like. And Nintendo and the Pokemon Company have promised that these games, more than any of the other games, are going to be a love letter to the entire 20-year legacy of Pokemon. That's awesome. That's great. That's phenomenal. And I'm really excited to get a chance to play those games. I think those are going to be out in October. So props to Nintendo for having the foresight to, make those announcements. I'm really looking forward to them. Don't know if I'll pick them up day one or not, but I'm definitely going to be picking them up. Definitely. Don't know which one I'd rather play, Sun or Moon. Don't really know, but I'll pick up both just to be on the safe side. So we got Pokemon Go, Pokemon Sun and Moon on the horizon. I'd like to see, if I had a request that I want to make to Pokemon Company about just something that they haven't announced yet, but something that I'd like to see in the future, certainly for this year, that would be, I would like to see Nintendo re-release Generation 2, the original Generation 2 games on the Nintendo 3DS Virtual Console. Gen 1's out. They did it for Gen 1. Everyone has said that Gen 2 is probably a better title, are probably in every way, at least from a gameplay perspective, better games than Gen 1. I'm not saying I disagree with that. I've never played Gen 2. So I can't comment. I'd love a chance to play it. I dare not break open my copy of Soul Silver. I have a copy of Soul Silver with a Pokewalker. I am not opening it. I found out the collector's value of that game is far too high for me to even consider opening it up. So I'm just going to have to wait on that. Yeah. I don't know. Have I even talked about the Pokewalker for this video? I don't know. But, yeah, I'm really looking forward to this year. I'd like to see what's going on. As far as I know, as of this time, for anybody that's listening to this video, at least for, when it comes out, I don't know of any other major events that are happening this year, except for, the Pokemon Regionals and the Pokemon Finals and the Pokemon National Championships and the Pokemon World Championships. Other than that, like I said, I think that I talked to the Toys R Us guy if they had any plans for doing any other Pokemon events, and they said not right now. There's none planned. So Toys R Us seems to be. I mean, I'd like to see Toys R Us do another event. I think both of the events they did this year were highly successful. I really would like to see them do more. Target's event was also a lot of fun. Really would like to see another one of those, but we'll see what happens in the meantime. I'd like to do these events, especially do these events around the time Sun and Moon come out. It'd be great. It'd be great for everybody. I love meeting other fans of Pokemon. And unfortunately, I'm probably not going to have much time this year to do any major conventions or anything. Maybe except for whatever's really close. But yeah, that's the plan for right now. I'd like to thank everybody for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. Please post a comment about what you'd like to see for our very next podcast. But I'm just going to say this right now. The next podcast is going to be Quantum Break. Yes, that'll be the next podcast. So post a comment on what you'd like to see in the future. I do have other podcasts planned as well, but next will be Quantum Break. So I'd like to thank you guys for listening to this podcast. We will be doing more of these on a more regular basis. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, guys, my name is Maniac with GameAccess.net. I'd like to thank you all for watching. Take care. Over and out.